Gatsby here, back from the WCQ, and after watching the scramble to assemble a Tier 0 engine from a set with a release date on the same day as the previously mentioned World Qualifier event, I decided to put Yu-Gi-Oh! Down if only for a minute to talk about something else, because after being priced out of almost an entire year at this point, I instead want to talk about a game where the only thing I've ever heard people talk about is the price. In my most recent video talking about Max C, I asked the comments for suggestions, and let this be proof that I actually read the comments section. Because when a top 100 Flesh and Blood player reached out to talk about his probable money laundering scheme turned competitive card game, I knew this was a video I would want to make, with topics that even to an outsider like me with zero interest in finding another way to burn money, seemed interesting and worth making a video about. So even if you don't play Flesh and Blood and have no intention of playing it, the video should still be palatable, and as a reward for your patience, I'll tie it back to Yu-Gi-Oh! At the end. Because God only knows that the only thing modern medicine has found to treat the symptoms of my specific brand of Stockholm Syndrome is to make YouTube videos bitching about cardboard. So what actually is Flesh and Blood? It's a class-based, fantasy-themed TCG with the end goal of bringing your opponent's health down to zero. The format is a best of one against unique heroes that have their own playstyles, abilities, and equipment, that each serve similar functions across applicable slots based on generic availability and class specializations. Which brings me to the first card I'm going to talk about today at a 45% play rate according to Fabrek, Fendel's Spring Tunic, which is widely considered to be one of the best chest equipment in the game. What might surprise you, however, is that it's intentionally designed this way to provide players a generically available piece of equipment that acts as a competitive baseline, so that even if your personal favorite doesn't have a best-in-slot competitive chest piece, you have something that's still a worthwhile option. The equipment generates an additional resource over the course of 3 turns, which is most easily comparable to something like Soul Ring in Magic the Gathering. There are better options depending on what's available for your chosen hero, but for some, Tunic sees upwards of an 80 to 90% play rate, making it a cornerstone of the game that shows that even if a card is strong, it can still be fair. So now you have an extra resource, what are you spending it on? For simplicity's sake, we'll just say that decks are composed of actions and reactions, with everyone having access to generic options, and each class having access to class-specific options. Because it wouldn't make a lot of sense if a warrior had the same exact card pool as a wizard. Most actions come in 3 different colors, providing another layer of decision making for the player, where reds are the strongest action with lowest resource values, blues are the weakest actions with higher resource values, and yellows are the intermediate. To activate cards, you would pay the cost on the top right by discarding cards from your hand with resource values notated on the top left. And as you play cards, they leave play, but if you discard them, they go to the bottom of your deck, providing another decision, because at the end of your turn, you draw the hand size defined by the intellect of your selected hero, meaning you're likely to go through your deck at least once, which could lead to you falling victim to the consequences of your own actions, being left with only weaker actions or no resources. So let's talk about what actually dictates the printed values. When designing cards, Legend Story Studios uses a soft-capped 8-point system that most cards fall in line with. Let's take a look at Wounding Blow. It has 4 attack, 3 defense, and 1 resource. Added together, that's 8. Scar for Scar only has 4 attack, 2 defense, 1 resource, that's 7 points, but the keyword Go Again is valued at a point of value, bringing it up to 8. Raging Onslaught shows 11 points of value, but is allowed additional value due to having cost present, making the card even. When developing class cards, an additional point of value is allowed to incentivize players to build in class instead of only slamming generic good stuff. One last thing to keep in mind is that defensive options play around the value 3, meaning that irregular attack values of 1, 4, and 7 are likely to present uneven trades if an attack requires blocking. So with those basics out of the way, let's talk about a card that had almost a 100% play rate early on, Enlightened Strike. Nowadays it hovers around 26%, but early on Enlightened Strike was a must-have. On the 8-point system, 5 attack, 3 defense, 1 resource, with the cost of putting a card at the bottom of the deck makes it even, but then you take into account the chosen effect, either drawing a card to effectively remove cost, moving the damage up to 7 to provide an uneven trade, or utilize a Go Again, allowing you to play an additional attack. Enlightened Strike really is the Swiss Army knife of attacks, and it's not difficult to see why it's good, but why is it only in 26% of decks? Similarly to Tunic, even though it's a strong card, there might be other options better suited for other strategies. But Enlightened Strike does act as a closer of gaps for decks lacking any of the previously mentioned options, making it worth talking about. Prior to talking about the last card, we need to take a slight detour and explain the arsenal. There exists a zone beneath your hero that allows players to, at the end of their turn, pocket a card to be played at a later turn. This is called the arsenal, effectively providing a +1 to hand size to accommodate larger pushes in value. There are other functional uses like mentors, but for the purposes of this video, just think of it as an extra slot for the hand. So your opponent's arsenal is set. What's the counterplay? At a 38% rate of play, Command and Conquer on the 8-point scale is even, without even mentioning its effect, where in response to this attack, defensive options can't be played, and if damage is dealt, it destroys the card in the arsenal. This locks your opponent out of purely defensive cards that could be played from the arsenal, and requires them to either block using cards from the hand, or taking up to 6 damage while also losing their cards in their arsenal. Command and Conquer effectively resets the tempo for the turn, slowing the opponent by either removing hand resources or removing arsenal resources. And although it's only a 38% rate of play, likely due to the price of the card, it's very important to talk about this as a function that can be used to control the flow of the game while also providing a unique form of counterplay, making it another cornerstone of the game. So what compelled me to make a video about a card game I've never seen played IRL, and frankly, after seeing some of the prices of these fucking cards, I'm surprised anyone can afford to play in the first place. Most of my TCG experience is from Yu-Gi-Oh!, and with Konami's announcement of a ban list delay until the end of August for deck building purposes, Blade Hobo talked to me about the company behind Flesh and Blood, Legend Story Studios, or LSS, an independent studio developed by a former Magic the Gathering professional, James White. And while the 8-point system is fascinating, once we started talking about how ban lists were handled, I knew this was a video I was going to want to make. We have 3 generically powerful cards that, despite seeing exceedingly high rates of play, are considered healthy to the fab environment. What happens when they aren't? What's the response? In one example, an equipment made for the Runeblade class called Duskblade was banned prior to its release due to playtesting revealing that the weapon offered little to no counterplay for the opponent, who would be forced to watch the weapon get stronger and stronger through the Runeblade class doing exactly what it was expected to do. In another example, an older card, Berserk, was banned prior to the release of a newer card, Savage Sash, due to what was deemed by LSS as creating an unfair interaction. The decision was made to remove the older piece and allow players to play with the newly released card instead of subjecting players to an obvious problem. When it comes to heroes, a different approach is taken, as it would most easily equate to a full archetype in another card game. The Living Legend system is my favorite thing about Flesh and Blood, and is a personal top 5 concept to come out of a TCG. Each hero and their signature gear is tied to a legend score that is provided points through tournament placements and victories. Once they reach 1,000 points, the hero and their signature gear are given the Living Legend status, rotating the hero out of the format. For information on this process, I would suggest checking out Blockout Party, who has made exceptionally high-quality videos about this process with his Journey to Living Legend series. His Starvo video had me hooked from start to finish, providing examples of what happened when Flesh and Blood was effectively under a Tier 0 format, with Captain Planet, aka Bravo, star of the show, leading the pack. Even with LSS providing updates and the Living Legend system in place, the Flesh and Blood community had a mixed reception with all things Starvo. However, coming from Yu-Gi-Oh!, I'm green with envy, wishing we had a fraction of the communication provided by LSS described in the video. Before I move on, seriously, check out their channel, link in the description. I was hooked for an hour on a channel with 1,000 subs. There is no justice. Going back to Yu-Gi-Oh!, determining the arrival of the ban list is like the male version of the astrology girl, with guesses being purely based on previous trends. The recent late August announcement felt like throwing a pool noodle to somebody in turbulent waters, and although Duel Links gets full explanations for each changes, Konami hasn't provided explanations for any changes since August 2016. And to both of these I somewhat understand, as the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community has a varying degree of neurosis, with where ban list flooding every social media post, and some of the most deranged ban list takes that are so laughably bad you'd think they were farming for engagements. I kind of understand the hesitation. Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of has the Living Legend effect felt at times when key archetype pieces are added or removed, dramatically impacting playability, but in some cases these ban list changes do fairly little, resulting in the top performing strategies remaining at the top. It's almost impossible to expect something like this would be implemented this late into Yu-Gi-Oh!'s lifespan, but it is an interesting thing to consider when watching how the community approaches this. Parfa's Last Card Standing series provided a look into what a hyper-accelerated Living Legend system could do by removing entire archetypes based on the top cuts every 2 weeks, and MBT ran a rotation series with the purpose of showing that even by placing constraints on the card pool, there is still interest in playing the game. Even Konami themselves pushed in July 2022 announcements to encourage alternate formats. During the WCQ, the Ultimate Totally Not Edison Time Wizard event hosted more than 500 players looking to play a format 14 years old, where instead of scrambling last minute for Fiendsmith playsets, duelists were finally able to take the opportunity to slot in an affordable Substitute reprint into their max rarity Frognark decks valued at 3 months worth of my salary. Flesh and Blood is very much still alive, and if you're interested in playing something that isn't the big three, their next set, Rosetta, releases in September 2024. If you're interested in learning how to play, I'm gonna link in the description Tolarian College's How to Play. For now, I'm gonna continue to try to make Yu-Gi-Oh content, because I do enjoy talking about the game, but I will be playing more Star Wars Unlimited for the time being, because after this weekend, I think the entire Yu-Gi-Oh community needs a break.
He's back.
He's back!
Yeah.
That's gonna be very painful. That's at least 4,500. We're going for big damage, and big damage. We get ancient gear taking game one.